everybody, welcome here to our second YouTube night. We just have, I think there's one announcement for everybody.
Yeah, it's so good to be here with you guys again. We have decided that we are, because Luke and I are doing everything together, we are gonna merge our youth into sort of one group. So this is kind of how it's gonna look. Our Instagrams right now, we've got two separate Instagrams. So if you're in Northview Mission, you're following our mission page. If you're in Abbotsford, you're following the Abbotsford page. We're gonna combine those into one. So the Northview Youth Abbotsford page is gonna become just the Northview High School Youth page. And our mission crew, you can go over and make sure that you follow the Northview High School Youth page. That's the page where we're gonna be going live throughout the week. We're gonna be posting announcements and what's coming up on the videos. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you follow that one as well.
All right, and now we're going to go to our next segment, which is our game time.
Super fun. Everybody, we are gonna play Never Have I Ever. This is how the game goes. You can feel free to play along with us. Luke and I are going to verse each other right now for you. We have 5 lives? 5
Fingers.
Anyways, 5 fingers.
5 fingers.
We are gonna say something that we have never done, and if the other person has done it, then they lose a finger. The first person who loses all of their fingers loses. So you can make bets right now who's gonna win, me or Luke.
Okay, first, never have I ever been in a school play.
Brutal. Second, never have I ever played on a football team.
Never have I ever been in a school musical.
That's the same thing
No, a
as
play
a
and a
play.
musical is different.
Never have I ever grown a mustache.
Never have I ever ran a half marathon in under 2 hours.
Never have I ever... Never have I ever gone to mow it.
Never have I ever been to a school or gone to school that starts with the word Abbotsford.
Never have I ever gone to school in England.
Never have I ever gone to a school that has blue as a mascot color or school color.
Nuh-uh.
Abbotsford traditional?
Not blue! Not blue!
But there is a blue in Abbotsford traditional.
Oh, there is not. Never have I ever gone to a French immersion school. Boom, boom, boom. I win, I win, I win.
All right, now we're going to head to our next segment, which is Bible reading time. So everyone pull out your Bibles, and we're going to read the Word together. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I have told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another, as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I am going, you cannot follow, but you will follow later." Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." But Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. John 13:31-38.
When I was in grade 8, I decided that I was going to be a missionary, that I was going to move to Africa and spend the rest of my life there doing something. I'm not really sure why I picked Africa, maybe because part of me assumed that if you were going to be a missionary, that's where missionaries went. But I had decided this for whatever reason, that in grade 8, this is how I was going to do. I was going to do this super amazing thing for God. Everyone would see me as this really amazing Christian because I was, willing to go to Africa. In grade 8, I also decided that I was going to ride a donkey across Canada. So obviously I had no problems dreaming big. Now here we are, several years later, and I didn't end up in Africa, and I ended up in mission. So none of those dreams actually came true. But as I kind of reflect and think back, okay, what was going on in grade 8? Why did I decide I wanted to go to Africa? I think that a piece of me had decided in grade 8 that in order to prove myself worthy to God, I needed to do this amazing big act of faith. Like I needed to prove to God that I was worth being on his team. So my decision about going to Africa wasn't because I particularly liked foreign culture or knew anything about it. It was really about trying to make my faith feel real. Like I could do something that would be good enough in God's eyes. And maybe you have never dreamed of going to Africa or never decided that Africa was going to be the place you would spend the rest of your life. But I think all of us have had at some point in our lives this kind of real faith ideal, this picture of what real faith looks like, what it actually looks like to be a good follower of Jesus. And maybe this looks different for you. Maybe this looks like an effort to live your life perfectly, to obey all of the rules, to do the Christian thing. Don't have sex before marriage, get good grades, have a successful career. Whatever it is we have this kind of idea about okay, this is what it should look like if we are going to be good enough to be on God's team. And if we do these things, then God's really the lucky one here. He gets to have me on his team. It's as if we somehow have it within ourselves to prove ourselves to God, that we're good enough to be on his team. And really, I think that this is a human problem. See, last week we jumped into the book of John, and today we're going to jump back in, and we're actually going to hear the dialogue between Jesus and his disciples. And we're going to zoom in on actually Peter and his response to Jesus, and then Jesus's response to Peter. And we're going to notice one thing, that it's not actually what we have within us, but it's what Jesus does for us. So, like I said, we're in the upper room, and Luke just read the text for us, so we're not going to read it all over again. But as way of reminder, where we're stepping into is actually Jesus' last meal with his disciples. This is his final conversation, his last major teaching that he has with his closest companions before he's going to go to the cross. And Luke ended on kind of this ominous note of Judas, the betrayer, leaving the group, and it says that it was night. So the disciples are left sitting around the table with Jesus. And they've kind of already started the conversation. They've had dinner, and now they're left sitting there with Jesus, and Judas has already gone out. In my family, if we're talking about something super interesting around the dinner table, often we'll find ourselves still sitting around the dinner table long after we've eaten. This is the kind of thing that's going on. This is a post-dinner conversation. And Jesus starts it out by saying that the Son of Man is glorified and God is glorified in him. It's as if he's saying, okay, the hour has now come. See, he knows that Judas leaving has set in motion events that are now going to lead to Jesus's eventual arrest and his death. And even though the disciples are ignorant of what this is going to look like, Jesus knows that the time has come. That's why he describes it that way. God is glorified. It's as if it's already done. And then he gives some alarming news to the disciples. He says that, okay, you who've been with me for the last several years, you've followed me, you've watched me teach, you've seen me do miracles. Well, now I'm going somewhere and you're not going to be able to follow me. Now think about what that would have sounded like to the disciples. They had given up everything to follow Jesus. They had given up everything to follow him, and now Jesus was saying, sorry, this is where it ends. You're not going to be able to follow me anymore. And I can only imagine as they're trying to wrap their minds around what Jesus could possibly be meaning. Then Jesus gives them a new commandment. He says to them, a new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Now, to you and me, this might not sound incredibly new or really that different than what Jesus has taught in the past, but hold on to that thought, and we're going to unpack that in just a minute. So Peter hears this, and the disciples hear this, and Peter responds to Jesus by saying, Lord, where are you going? You can almost hear and sense the panic in his voice. It's as if he entirely missed that whole part that Jesus said about the new commandment, and he is focused in on the fact that his Lord and teacher has just told him that he's going somewhere that Peter can't follow. And to be fair to Peter, he's likely voicing what the other disciples would have been thinking. Peter just has a bigger mouth. So he says this to Jesus, Lord, where are you going? And he almost interprets what Jesus is saying as if Jesus is questioning his loyalty and his strength and his determination to follow Jesus. And so he follows it up by explaining to Jesus, come on, Jesus, you actually you don't really get it. See, Jesus, I would lay my life down for you. Jesus, I would die for you. See, Peter was trying to prove himself to Jesus that he had what it took. That he had what it took to do what was needed. See, likely Peter had been hearing Jesus in the past say things like he was going to suffer and there was going to be bad things coming. So likely Peter knew that it wasn't going to go well for them. And Peter is desperately trying to prove to Jesus that he has what it takes. So how does Jesus respond to Peter? Well, I imagine that Jesus looks at Peter with compassion. He knows Peter's heart. But rather than Jesus clarifying what he means, or even Jesus expressing the extent of suffering that was coming, instead Jesus exposes what's actually going on in Peter. See, Peter thinks that he's heroic enough to lay down his life for Jesus, but Jesus promises him that he's not. And in fact, Jesus goes further that we know that eventually all of the disciples are going to desert Jesus, but Peter specifically is going to deny Jesus 3 times. We don't actually get to hear Peter's reaction to that statement. We don't know if he said anything back or what his face would have looked like. In fact, we don't actually hear anything from Peter for the next several chapters until chapter 18 in the book of John, when we hear Peter publicly denying that he ever knew Jesus in the midst of Jesus' arrest and trial. So much for Peter laying down his life. So So what do we learn from this chunk of verses? It honestly is kind of discouraging if that's the end of the story. If that's the whole story, then we're kind of left with a sense of disappointment in Peter. But if we take a moment to actually zoom out from this conversation, I think what we're going to find is a treasure that's actually at the core of understanding the truth and beauty of the gospel. See, if we look at Peter's promise to Jesus, what was he actually saying to Jesus? He says the words, "I will lay my life down for you, Jesus." See, what's going on inside of Peter is that he's actually relying on something within himself. His own strength, his own devotion, his loyalty, his faith, to prove himself worthy of Jesus. To prove himself good enough. And doesn't this sound a little bit like us? That we somehow have it within ourselves to prove ourselves to God. That we can be good enough. That we can obey enough rules. That we can look nice enough. That God will want us. But what we said at the beginning is that it's not what we have within us, but actually what Jesus does for us. See, Peter didn't understand what was coming. He didn't understand what was coming. He didn't understand that it wasn't actually about Peter laying his life down for Jesus, but actually that Jesus had to lay his life down for Peter. It wasn't about what Peter had to give, but what Jesus needed to give. What Jesus needed to give on behalf of Peter, but also on behalf of the entire world. See, God knew all along that we don't have it within us, just as much as Jesus knew that Peter didn't have it within him. God knew that we could never save ourselves. We could never make ourselves worthy by promising to go to Africa or by promising to give our life as Peter did. We don't have it within us to get ourselves a place in heaven. See, if we rewind, what was new about Jesus's commandment to his disciples, his new commandment to love one another, was that there was a piece of it that was different. See, we've heard the familiar phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. But Jesus changes it. He says, love one another as I have loved you. Jesus knew what was to come would be the greatest act of love that we have ever experienced in all of humanity. The creator of the universe was going to offer his life in our place, his life for ours. Not because we earned it, not because we deserved it, but all motivated by this great act of love. This was a new kind of love, and this was a new kind of commandment. So some final thoughts. What do we do with this? Well, the first thing that we hear in this is that we don't have it within us to save ourselves. You don't have it within you to save yourself. You don't have it within you to prove yourself good enough to God. The beauty of that is that God knows that. And yet often I hear myself sound a whole lot like Peter. I hear myself determined to look perfect on the outside, determined for others to see me as someone who is good enough. And I'm ashamed to admit the failure and the sin that's within me. I only want people to see the good. I only want God to see the good. And I think if I can just do enough right things, then it'll outweigh the bad. But just as Peter knew the heart of his much loved disciple, Jesus knows our hearts. There's no need to pretend. There's no need to pretend that we're perfect. Instead, he He offers us life. He offers that we would actually receive his perfection, his life on our behalf, rather than making up our own. And the second thing that this teaches us is that Jesus actually calls us to model his kind of sacrificial love. He sets out a new model for us, a new way of loving. John is the writer of this gospel that we're reading, and John is one of Jesus' disciples. So he was there during this whole conversation that we've just listened into. And later in the New Testament, John actually writes another book, or another couple books, and one of them is called 1 John. And in it, he writes these words. He says, "Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us." I can't help but think that maybe John was reflecting on this very conversation with Jesus as he wrote these words. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. So don't promise to go to Africa or promise any other thing to try to prove yourself to God, to prove yourself worthy of him. Instead, respond to this kind of love, this kind of sacrificial love daily. And we respond to this love by actually reflecting it to those around us, to the one another around us. And I don't know who your one another is in your life right now, but I can probably guess that for most of us, as we live in this kind of isolation world, it's probably your mom, your stepdad, your brother, your sister, your foster sibling, whomever it is. Those around you right now are your one another that you and I are called to love with this kind of sacrificial love. And Jesus gave us not only the model, but the power that we need to actually love this way. And he also offers us the grace and the forgiveness when we don't. It's not so that we might prove ourselves somehow worthy of God. Instead, it's that we might make visible the invisible God to those around us so that they might know and love him as we do. So let's pray, and then we'll meet in small groups to talk a little bit more about this. God, you are a good God. We have your word that gives us this reflection of your heart for us. God, it teaches us the story of your great act of love on our behalf. God, I pray that you would make us worthy of this call that you've placed on our lives, and not so that we can earn anything or deserve anything. God, you have finished it. It is done. But so that we can live in light of it, God, and that we can be an embodiment of your love to the world around us. God, teach us how to do this. Give us what we need in order to do this. Equip us for what you've called us into, God. In your name, amen.
Thanks, Danae, for the word. We are now going to go into a time of reflection, and so you're gonna on your screen. There's going to be some questions for you to reflect on before you go into your core groups. So reflect. You can pause the video or whatever, or just end the video. Reflect on those questions, and then meet in your small group afterwards.
guys, it's been a great night with you. Again, we've been praying for you. We've been thinking of you lots as we put together tonight. We hope that you'll think about these things as you meet in your Zoom rooms tonight. If you don't know where your group is meeting, send us a message. Let us know. We'd love to connect you with your small group leader. That's all we have for now. See you next week.